Welcome to episode 8 of Basically a Therapist, but without the degree. I am Lauren Larson, and I'm just so honored that you're here with me. It makes my heart so happy when you tune in and when you share that you are listening and or watching the podcast. It just makes my little heart so happy. So thank you so much for just being on this journey with me. If you can't tell by now, I am fed. I am not hungry. I was editing last week's episode and I was laughing so hard because I just looked hungry. I looked like I had no energy whatsoever, and I was just laughing the entire time that I was editing because you can just tell that like I was unwell. And so the life is back in my eyes. I am happy. I am not hungry. My belly is nice and full, and we're good to go. So welcome to episode 8, where I'm much happier with my life. Today, I want to talk about conflict resolution and just how to experience peace in conflict resolution. I feel like conflict resolution and conflict in general just have a really negative stigma around it. And it's unfortunate because it doesn't have to be that way. Conflict is healthy, it's normal, and it's an opportunity to create intimacy with the other person. And so I want to kind of get rid of some of those negative stigmas that are around conflict resolution because it doesn't have to be as bad as we think it is. And I'm going to tell you. So, first of all, this is going to be a two-parter. In this episode, we're just going to talk about understanding what conflict is, and then also looking at what the Bible says about conflict, because I think that will help you in the way that you view conflict as well. And then next week, we'll talk about a couple other things with conflict resolution. But first of all, let's understand what conflict is. So I want to start off by saying this. Conflict is healthy. I know I just said it, but I'm probably going to say it a lot of times. Conflict is healthy. Let's start rewiring our thoughts about conflict. Conflict is healthy. It's the way that conflict is handled that doesn't always make it healthy. So the actual conflict isn't the issue. It's the way that we are handling the conflict. It's normal, it's healthy, and it's a natural part of life. It always weirds me out when people that are married or in a relationship for a long amount of time say, oh, we never fight. Like, that's not normal. Like, that's not okay. You should be having conflict. You should know how to work through conflict. If you're not having conflict, then there's some other issues going on. Maybe fear of conflict, maybe some people pleasing, maybe all of the above, but conflict is good. Have some conflict. So what is the definition of conflict? All conflict means is that it's a serious disagreement or argument, typically an extended one, but not always. There are several different types of conflict. There's interpersonal conflict, there's organizational conflict, family conflict, political conflict, social conflict, ideological conflict, all types of conflict. But I just kind of want to stick with the interpersonal conflict because it kind of covers several different areas within our life. So that's the main one that I want to cover. Let's talk about some common causes of conflict because there's quite a few things. But the first one is miscommunications or misunderstandings. So we have a lens on how we view the world and a filter through which we process everything. And like I said, that filter and that lens is influenced by our life, by our experiences, by our family of origin, by trauma, by the people that we hang out with, by all sorts of things. So another common cause of conflict is just differing values, opinions, and beliefs, which again is our lens, our perception on how we view the world. Another common cause of conflict is unresolved past issues. That's a big one. Have you heard the term hurt people hurt people? It's true. If we are only hearing and seeing people through our unhealed wounds, we are going to be offended and hurt and angry all the time. Everything is going to create conflict. There's those people that just have this victim mentality where they think that everybody is out to get them and everything is against them. And that's just not true. You're just seeing the world that way because there's something unhealed in you. Another common cause of conflict is insecurity. Ooh, this is a big one. Man, how much conflict do we experience in our lives because of insecurity? I know for me, it's something that flares up every now and then. I've worked through it a lot, and it's something that I lived through and spoke through for years. And now that I've identified my insecurities, it's better. It's not perfect. I'm not over them, but they're much better. So insecurities are feelings of jealousy and envy that can lead to stories that we create about ourselves or other people or the situation. And we all are familiar with these insecurities. Our minds can create, they are very creative. Our minds are very creative when it comes to insecurity. And the enemy is very good about using our insecurities to trigger us, to create that conflict with other people. So the Bible says in Ephesians 6:12 that our fight is not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual forces of evil in heavenly places. So when we have that verse at the forefront of our mind, we can start to live in a way that we are not looking at people as the problem, but we know that the enemy is working things against us and against our connections because it's a threat to him and his plan. Another common cause of conflict is ego and pride. Stubbornness and unwillingness to admit fault can escalate conflicts. It also will create disconnection. It doesn't allow for trust. It doesn't allow for safety in relationships. When somebody, I want you to think about this. When you have somebody who doesn't admit that they're ever wrong, refuses to, how does that make you feel? It doesn't make you feel good. It doesn't make you want to approach that person. It doesn't make you feel safe with that person. It doesn't make you feel connected and intimate with that person. But what about the person that can so easily own up to their problems, to their mistakes, to their missteps and say, you know what, I messed up there. I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? And I want to talk to the people that have a hard time owning their mistakes. We do not look at you differently. We do not think that you are less than. We do not think that you are not good enough just because you can't admit your faults. We just don't feel safe, nor do we trust you. And so you need to determine what's most important, your pride and ego or the connection. We still love you. We accept you. And for me personally, when somebody admits that they're wrong, I actually respect them more. Like they gain my respect. Because I'm like, okay, this is a person who has personal accountability, who has personal ownership over themselves, and who is confident in themselves to say, like, I messed up and I want to make this better for us. That's the type of person that I want to be in relationship with. Another common cause of conflict is personality clashes. Just sometimes people are incompatible in their personalities, and that just creates conflict. Another common cause of conflict is external pressure. So there can be external factors like societal expectations or just stress that contributes to the conflict. So maybe it's stress from work and your spouse comes home and they are just high strung, and it creates a conflict. It creates conflict with you guys. Another one is cultural differences. We all have our own cultures in which we were raised, and sometimes we don't understand each other's cultures. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just what it is. And then the last one is just changes and transitions in life. So a new baby, marriage, a move to a different place, anything like that can create conflict. So let's talk about the impact of unresolved conflict. So I want you to think about how you feel when you're at conflict with somebody. It weighs on you, right? It's stressful. For me, it's all consuming. My mind will not let it go. I have to look at it at all aspects. I have to turn it around in my head, and then I have to turn it around and turn it around and turn it over. And I have to keep doing that over and over and over again until I wear myself out. But it just takes up space in your brain. It distracts you. Maybe it creates feelings of tension and anxiety. It affects your sleeping. It affects how you show up in other relationships. These are just some ways that conflict can impact us, but let's look at a few more. So it can strain our relationships. So unresolved conflict can lead to strained and damaged relationships. It can increase our stress. It can decrease our productivity. I know when I have something weighing on my mind, like if my husband and I are fighting or I have an argument with a friend or whatever, it is so hard for me to focus on anything else or get anything else done that my productivity tends to just kind of go down the drain until it's taken care of. Another one is escalation. So not addressing the conflict can possibly make it worse. Emotional strain, it can create emotional distress, anxiety, depression. Hostility is another one. Unresolved conflict can also make you miss opportunities. If it goes unresolved, you're missing opportunities for growth. You're missing opportunities for development, for creating connection, for deepening the relationship. Can also damage your reputation, can create health issues. Chronic unresolved conflict is linked to physical and mental health problems, including hypertension and anxiety disorders. It can have a negative impact on others. Unresolved conflicts can indirectly affect people around you and those connected to the party, especially if you're somebody that likes to tell everybody what's going on. And if you're like me, like I said, you're just obsessed with it and it's all you talk about. And then you're starting to affect how other people view that person. Or other people can just be sick of hearing about it and not want to hang around you. That's also a possibility. Could also decrease trust. Trust erodes when conflict remains unresolved. It makes it harder to rebuild that relationship. Because I don't know about you, but for me, the longer that something goes on, the more of a story that I start creating on their behalf. Like, oh, they hate me, or oh, they're probably this, or they're probably that, or probably, and you start creating these stories that may or may not be true. And then the last one that I have listed is unresolved conflict could have long-term consequences. It could impact future interactions and decisions. When you just don't resolve conflict and then you see that person in public, or you run into them, or maybe you still run in the same circles, you go to the same church, or it's in your family, and then you see them, it can just build and build and build, and it's just not worth it. So let's talk about what the Bible says about conflict. So if you're familiar with the Bible, you know that conflict is woven throughout the entire Bible, starting in the very first book, Genesis. So let's see what the Bible says about conflict. Matthew 5:9 says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." This verse emphasizes the value of working towards peace and reconciliation. Matthew 18:15 says, "If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over." And so what this verse is talking about is it's just highlighting the importance of addressing conflict privately and seeking resolution rather than publicly shaming them or telling everyone around you what happened. Romans 12:18 says, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." So this is just encouraging individuals to strive for peace and harmony. And I want to highlight this verse because I don't want you to think that living at peace with everyone means being in relationship with them. We are called to forgive, not called to be in relationship with everyone. We are to treat everyone with respect and as the child of God that they are. We can also do that from a distance as well. But like I said, resolution doesn't always mean being in relationship with. But again, we are to love and respect everybody. Ephesians 4:26-27 says, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not let the devil get a foothold." And I think this passage just really highlights the importance of managing your anger and not letting conflict fester. I've always been taught, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry in your marriage. But sometimes you need to let the sun go down. Sometimes you need to go to sleep, and that's okay. One of the things that my pastor said, he talked about this recently, was, if him and his wife are in conflict and they've done all they could for the day and they're just exhausted and they're not getting anywhere, they will put a pin in it and they'll go back to it the next day. But what he will do is he will put a hand on her at night in bed and pray, letting the enemy know that he can't get a foothold. He cannot do any work because they are still united front. They're just putting a pin in it. And I love that so much. And so there was one time after my husband and I had heard that sermon that we were in conflict and it was nighttime and we had said everything that there needed to be said for that day and we weren't getting anywhere. And so it was just time to go to bed. And I remember I rolled over and I'm laying there, my head's going crazy. And I feel my husband's hand on my back. And I knew that he was praying for us and that he was covering us. And it was so powerful because it gave me a sense of assurance and peace that no matter what, we're still united front and we're still good. And nothing bad is going to happen. It's just conflict that we're going to work through because we're a team. The next one is Colossians 3:13. "Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." Wow. Obviously, forgiveness is emphasized in this verse, and the way that God forgives us continually and always. I recently read a book, and it was such a powerful book. It's an old one. I'm completely forgetting what it's called right now. It talked about forgiving people as the Lord forgave you, and then asking God to bless them. Ooh, man, that is so hard. Wow. So you're telling me to forgive somebody who hurt me and also ask God to bless them, especially if they're not sorry. I'll find the name of that book and I'll put it in the show notes. Again, it's an older book, but wow, I remember reading that and I was like, wait, is there a typo in here? I'm pretty sure this is wrong. And then I did it and it was crazy. It actually worked and it changed my heart towards some people that I had been harboring unforgiveness towards. And it was wonderful. The next one is James 3:18. "Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness." And this is just encouraging the role of peacemakers and bringing about righteousness. It's about stressing the importance of addressing conflict with a spirit of reconciliation, forgiveness, and peacemaking through love and mercy and grace. Like I said, this is going to be a 2-part podcast, but I hope that just going through these verses and just having a better understanding of conflict will help you start to shift your mind and your perception of conflict. And so when you're in conflict this week, I am praying that you will not view it as negative, but as an opportunity to create intimacy and connection. You know, I recently had to use my conflict resolution skills with a friend. And just because I have this new view of conflict resolution doesn't make it fun. I don't look forward to conflict resolution, but I'm not as anxious as I used to be. I will tell you that I am much more confident in my ability to resolve conflict, in my communication skills. And it also just depends on the relationship too, because there could be somebody that you're in relationship with that is immature, that doesn't have the maturity level to handle conflict. And so how they handle it could be really unhealthy and really hurtful. But that doesn't mean that you need to be the same way. You can still show up in a healthy, mature, heavenly way, the way that God has asked us to show up in conflict, without meeting them where they're at. And so back to my story. So I was in some conflict with a friend, and, I was a little nervous, but I wasn't like anxious, and I wasn't freaking out like I used to. And it was so nice because I owned my part. And what I have been able to do in conflict resolution is to own my part and where I can improve, and also realize what's theirs. And I've talked about this before in the last several weeks of this podcast, is that once we have an idea of what actually belongs to us and what's ours and what's theirs, you show up differently. You just show up more confidently. So when I'm in conflict with somebody, I can parse out what is a preference of theirs and validate that. So I have this friend who didn't like that I had texted kind of a hard to chew text. They didn't like that I texted it. And so I could realize that their preference is an in-person touch or a phone call or maybe even a voice note. But texting is not their preference. And so I was able to validate that. I didn't do anything wrong, and I was able to realize that. I didn't need to take ownership of something because it's not something I did wrong, but I was able to validate the fact that they have a preference of an in-person touch. And so I said that, I apologize for hurting their feelings, because I did, and that's never my intent to hurt somebody on purpose. So I was able to apologize for that. And then I was able to validate, I see that you would rather have an in-person touch, and I will be sure to do my best to do that in the future. And they felt validated, they felt seen, and it was great. So I owned, here's a little tip. When you are in conflict resolution, when you are in the talking, if you off the bat start off with owning your side, your piece, your fault, you will disarm the other party. I promise you. I promise you. Because think about it. From your side of things, you have an argument. You have an argument all built up. You did this, this, and this, blah, 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 blah. You have a whole script. You're ready to go in on them. You're ready to lay in on them. And imagine you guys start the conversation and this person says, before we get started, I want to say that the way that I spoke to you, what I did was unacceptable, and I apologize. Will you forgive me? Oh, Could you imagine if we all owned our part? How much better, how much healthier conflict resolution would be. And so your homework this week is to own your part. I will talk about ownership and personal accountability until the day that I die because it is so important. You gain so much more respect. You gain our respect when you own your faults, when you own your mistakes, when you say, I am sorry, I messed up, I did this, this, and this, and that was not okay. Forgive me, please. How can I make it better? Can you imagine if we all did this? There has to be some self-awareness, yeah. You have to know what you're saying. You have to know what you're doing. You have to realize how you're showing up. But can you imagine? Oh my gosh, the relationships would just be so insane. The conflict resolution would be so much better. That's your homework this week. Own your part. Beat them to it. Be the first to apologize. There's nothing wrong with apologizing. Don't apologize for something you didn't do just to make it better. And if you're having a hard time figuring out what you need to apologize for, let's chat or ask a friend. Or if you don't know, ask the person that you're in conflict with. Like, hey, help me understand what I did wrong because I want to make this better. And they'll tell you. I'm sure they would love to tell you. Or maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they're scared. Maybe they're scared of your reaction. Maybe they're scared of you blaming them, projecting it on them, deflecting, being defensive. Do any of those ring a bell? Any of those feel familiar? Conflict doesn't have to be bad. Conflict isn't bad. It's how we handle it that makes it negative, that makes it uncomfortable, that makes it unhealthy. Own your part this week. Be the first to apologize. Figure out a way to make it better. And then meet me here next week and we'll talk about the rest. Bye. Yeah.